Welcome to the American Security Council Protecting Our Freedoms podcast. The mission of the American Security Council is to educate and engage American citizens on national security matters, economic security matters, and the need for moral leadership in the United States of America. Please enjoy the podcast.
Welcome to Protecting Our Freedoms. I am your host, Joy Votrobek, and with me is Mark Renehan, my co-host.
How's everyone doing?
Today's podcast, we have Alan Dowd back, our senior fellow here at the American Security Council Foundation, and we will be discussing his new article titled Order of Magnitude. This is the first in his two-part series, which we will be posting the second part next week, and you can find his current article and then the next week's article on our website at www.ascf.us under Position Papers and the Dowd Report. And while you're there, we have a special special offer, limited time offer, I will say. Any donation of $25 or more, and you will get Mark Levin's American Marxism book.
I didn't know that. Excellent. Yes. Giving away books. I like it.
Yes, we are. Welcome back, Alan. How are you?
Good to be back. Doing fine. Joy, how are you? Hi, Mark. Hi, Joy.
Hi.
Hi, Alan. It's nice to finally meet you. I have read some of your articles, and I've heard your name mentioned many, many times, so it's going to be fun chatting with you. As I told Joy after reading your articles, he's way smarter than I am, so I guess I'll learn something today. So I'm looking forward to it.
I doubt that. I'm sure we'll all learn something. But happy to be here. It's always good to chat with Joy, and glad to have another one on the call or
Excellent.
The podcast.
Thanks, Alan. And on this podcast, we're going to discuss why a rules-based democratic order, or otherwise called the liberal international order, was implemented, and why it is in danger of being replaced by an autocratic regime. Alan, can you explain, first of all, what the rules-based democratic order is and why it was implemented?
Well, I think it's, for Americans, and I think for a lot of people in what used to be known as the Western world, the free world, its roots really, I think, stretch back to the end of World War I. Wilson's ideas about what a reordered world could look like are kind of the outlines of what we now call the liberal democratic order, the liberal international order. But really, it began to take momentum and take firm shape with the Atlantic Charter, which, as you guys know, Churchill and FDR wrote before America's entry into World War II, but Britain had already been in for almost 2 years by the time the charter was written. And that charter, as you guys know, and I'm sure most of the listeners know, broadly, basically says that we want to have a post-war world that is founded on self-government, free sovereign nations that respect borders, that have a sense of the rule of law, that believe in human dignity, that there's an equitable peace after the war, there's open markets, and freedom of the seas and open trade opportunities. So that kind of sets the groundwork for what over the years starts to be known as the liberal international order. Rules-based democratic order is a mouthful. But basically what that order is, it's what the era after World War II, 45 on, was kind of premised on. And what it describes is what it is. Democratic governance is encouraged, is promoted, is defended. Rules and norms of behavior are codified, are developed, and at their best, defended and promoted by those who agree with the liberal order. And there's liberal, this is the old classical definition of liberal, which means freedom-oriented. Political and economic institutions are set in place and grow and encouraged to grow. And then all governments are encouraged or called upon to live up to the responsibilities of nationhood, which includes promoting order within your borders, respecting those on the other side of your borders, making sure you're living up to the responsibilities of nationhood internally by not mistreating your citizens and things like that. So that's kind of the broad, definition of this idea of a liberal international order.
Thank you.
And its roots, where it comes from.
Thank you for explaining that. And it encompasses some institutions, correct, as far as, I believe, the League of Nations, which now is the UN.
Yeah, I would say that there are both structure institutions and conceptual institutions that are parts of the liberal international order. Things like you mentioned, the United Nations would at its best be that. When it's functioning at its best, it would be certainly an outgrowth of the liberal international order. I would submit that, and you and I have talked about this before, Joy, the UN doesn't really live up to its responsibilities or its charter in defending the principles of liberal governance or liberal order very often. That's a subject for another podcast.
Yeah, well, actually, I was actually going to get into that, touch on it a little bit, because recently with this going on in Afghanistan, the UN Security Council had voted to pass a resolution telling the Taliban they must grant safe passage to eligible Afghans. Interestingly, well, not interestingly, but Russia and China both did not vote at all. They abstained.
Right.
So we have questions as to whether the UN is the right institution to be in this rules-based.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can't trust the Taliban, who can you trust? I don't.
That's right.
I mean, I take them for their word when they say things. So
Exactly. Well, that pretty much says it all too. That the UN and two key members of the permanent members of the Security Council don't even agree to support the notion that people have the freedom of movement and the freedom of travel, which is a kind of a basic human right, which the UN says it believes in. But the liberal international order, called for the promotion and respect for human rights, the expansion of free trade, and so at the beginning, people like Harry Truman forged key institutions. NATO comes to mind. The United States pushed the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. We promoted free trade through things like GATT, which is not called GATT anymore.
WTO, I think.
WTO, exactly. And other tariff-lowering initiatives. By the way, on the idea that this also is very much in our self-interest. This isn't just altruism. This is enlightened self-interest. The Americans concluded, I think, after World War II, that we would try to reshape the world in a way that helped strengthen our own role in the world and strengthen our own reach and enhance our own power by in effect refashioning the world somewhat in an image America really could appreciate it and embrace.
And what you said right there, you bringing me to my next question really is, do you think that us enforcing the rules-based democratic order makes America look like they're policing the world?
Yeah, I think it does. And I think it does to both critics inside the United States who are on the left and right, for sure, as well as critics outside the United States. I would one thing I'd say, Joy and Mark, is that it's not this isn't just America's order. This is an order that benefits those who participate in it. And there's empirical evidence to show that over the last since 1945, over the last 70 plus years. And so it's not just the United States that polices this order. It's the free world, and we have partners who help us do that.
I watched about a month or two ago on National Geographic. There was one of the stations, there was a documentary on North Korea. And I remember as I watched it, and I believe the reporter's name was Lucy Ling, I forget, but she was touring the country, and obviously she had her handlers with her. But the people there, and again, I lived in China for 5 weeks, not lived, but I visited China for 5 weeks when I was young, as I was telling you, and I saw communism firsthand, and even as a young person, I could kind of tell what it was. But when I watched this documentary of the North Koreans, I just couldn't help but think, like, somebody's got to get over there and free these people, and give them some roller coasters, give them some, give them some McDonald's or whatever it is, because the people would just, horrified. So I guess, and whenever I'm asked about, world police, I always think to myself, at the next, UN Council meeting, can't everyone get together and be like, let's go over there and free the North Koreans, or things along that line. Again, and I don't mean to. I know that's obviously some people, it's a touchy subject, but to me, there is definitely a need for, and I guess it comes down to good versus evil almost, like you just said. If it's not us, if it's not the British or the Canadians or the Norwegians or all these countries that just came together to do what they could in Kabul, others will eventually do it, and ones that may not be as friendly as, say, the United States. Of course, I think everyone will say that the U.S. is not perfect, and of course we've had our faults over the years, but I think we do it pretty well, and it's one of the better places to live on the planet in terms of freedom and, like you said, the post-World War II liberal order. So that's
Right.
I agree, and I was going to say too, Alan, is that I mulled that over my head as well, and I think that yes, someone has to do it, and if it's not us, it's going to be someone else. But when we have these institutions that are international and they make decisions like the UN Security Council telling the Taliban what they think, who's going to enforce it?
Who enforces it? That's right. Well, I always exactly. There's no, while there is something known as the International Criminal Court, it has no real writ or jurisdiction. It has no sheriffs. It has no army to do its work. The UN Security Council passes resolutions, and then the burden of enforcing those resolutions, it falls to nation states, responsible parties, and that's usually the United States and a coalition, an ad hoc coalition usually, that goes and enforces it. So you're exactly right, and that's something that there've been people who've said, let's look at creating a standing army or something like that. That makes a lot of people very uncomfortable, a standing international army. But the alternative is either have somebody else do the enforcing whose values we don't share, or we and our close partners, our close friends who share our values, carry out, enforce some modicum of order in the world. And I do think that's the best alternative.
Yeah, and maybe not
exist.
even needing a standing army, like you said, but it seems like we do come together, like you just mentioned with Kabul, and evacuating people there with our allies, and then again with the French down in Africa in the Sahel there as well.
Yeah, everyone likes to have allies when they are going up against it, I guess we would say, back home. So that definitely, I think a strong coalition is 100% necessary in order to keep that liberal order in check, I guess, is the correct
That's right,
word.
and that to answer exactly, and to answer Joy's point that was 10 minutes ago, it's one way to show if we do these types of things in coalition and alliance with others, it shows that we aren't the United States isn't the one dictating things. It's a coalition of like-minded nations that are playing this role. The United States isn't dictating. It's working in coalition or in partnership with these other countries to do it. And I think that's another reason to have allies, is for the perception's sake, to be honest. Both at home and abroad, but maybe especially abroad in those cases.
That's good marketing, Alan. What's what we call that?
That's right.
It's quality marketing for those
That's right.
activities.
We talk a lot about allies, Alan, over in the South China Sea.
Right.
It's pretty heated there as well, argument over who's able to have what sovereignty over their territories. And that also went to a tribunal court. I believe it was an international based.
Yeah.
So someone's got to enforce it. And that leads into my third question, which you both already brought up, is do you believe we are in danger of a powerful autocratic regime such as China replacing the current rules-based democratic order?
Well, that's yes. I mean, that's certainly Xi Jinping's goal. He says we need to move beyond the current order. He makes that very clear. China, unlike Russia, is a nation that has the heft, the industrial, technological, economic, and military might to challenge the United States in the way that Russia can't. China, in fact, has those attributes of a great power that the Soviet Union had, but Russia doesn't have. Russia, as you guys both know, is a nation that's actually withering away. Its population's declining. It has a lot of nuclear weapons, the most on Earth. So that makes it a power that can't be trifled with. But it can't do the things China can do. And Xi Jinping has made it very clear he wants to move past this existing order, which is an order that he feels hems in his country, constrains and constricts his country, and he, I do think, is setting the table for a way to do that. I think the only way that succeeds, though, is if the United States abandons or abdicates its role of leadership of this liberal order. China's, I don't think, will be able to push the United States out, but the United States might just kind of limp away or slouch away, which we have done before at other times in our history. It'd be very destructive, I would say maybe catastrophic, if we did that here in the 2020s and 2030s because of China. Mark, you said something the other day, a moment ago. There's nowhere else to go. Another way to look at that, or a version of that, is there's no one else who can carry this mantle. In 1945, the British could, in good conscience, give up the mantle of leadership of the liberal democratic world to the United States, because they saw that the United States shared basically broadly the same principles that the British had, and the British had defended and promoted. There's no one like that now. We don't have anyone we can give that mantle to. Those who share our values don't have the capabilities. Those who have the capabilities don't share our values, and that's China and Russia, but especially China.
And that must have been one of the, not to bring this up again, but one of the horrifying things. If I was an American over in Kabul, I would have said to myself, if the Americans aren't coming to get us, then nobody is. We're really
That's right.
up the creek here. I didn't say the full phrase,
That's
but
right.
we're really up the creek if nobody's coming over to get us here. And it's also interesting that and Joy and I next week we're doing a 4-part series on September 11th. Now it's 20 years later of September 11th, and it's kind of a little bit crazy that here we are 20 years later, and the Taliban has just inserted itself right back into the news after they were, 20 years on September 11th, after the attacks, they were, all that was talked about, and then here we are 20 years later, and it's almost like a reset. So it's been a wild couple of weeks.
And on top of that, they've got some more sophisticated equipment as well, military-wise.
I would like a Blackhawk helicopter.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie to you.
It's a terrible, tragic irony that what has happened, and it was avoidable. We don't have to turn Afghanistan into a Jeffersonian democracy, but for a low amount of money, and we had treasure, and we had not expended any blood in Afghanistan since February of 2020. We were maintaining that baseline modicum of order, and we were able to strike, terrorists in this seat of terror, and we can't do those things now. And then you guys, it's not just a loss, it's a double loss, because they gain the kinds of, tactical weapons that they've never had, really. And they'll be able to that'll enable them to put down rivals and challengers like those that are in the north that don't recognize their power, and it will be. You're right. 20 years later, it's really tragic and sad.
You mentioned that. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say it's funny. I've heard a lot of people say, they were left Blackhawks, or they don't know how to fly them, or they don't know how to use them. And I wanted to say, don't worry, they'll find somebody they can pay that will teach them. Like, it's not.
Well, whoever said that to you, Mark, should look at the cover of the Wall Street Journal website right now. They have a picture of a Blackhawk helicopter with the Taliban flag in the air.
I mean, if you have the money and the resources, you'll find a way, is what I like to say. So. Well,
also, I think there's probably dispossessed former members of the Afghan national military that'll probably work with the Taliban just for survival's sake, some of them. So, but it's tragic, and I'm sure your 4-part series will delve into a lot of that. There's a lot to dig into 20 years later.
And you discussed in your article that we're talking about here is the stateless people like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Now, ISIS-K is against the Taliban. Well, I didn't say totally against, but they just not working together. But with the Taliban in possession of our military equipment, and there could be a rise of extremist groups all over the globe.
And they could also funnel that money, the weapons, ammo, and all that can now be spread out to similar-minded people, almost as the same way we would supply our allies to help keep the liberal order. they're going to use these supplies to supply their allies to help keep the terrorist order. So.
Right. I think that's true, and it starts in Afghanistan, and it will, as it was before, it will again become a metastasis for terror, a cancer that'll spread from there, and they will use those weapons to promote what their vision is, which is certainly not a liberal order. It's either a theocratic jihadist order or just utter chaos.
And I don't know about you, Mark, but I don't want to live under that or China's idea.
No, I'm very, very happy with the laws and the lifestyle here of good old Sebastian, Florida. I am perfectly okay with everything we have here and do not want to switch up on that. So.
Well, that by the way is, we and Joy knows this. The article, my part one, I think, talks about this. We just don't we don't appreciate, the average American doesn't appreciate what this liberal order has given us. It is enlightened self-interest, but it is mostly self-interest. Really, it is. And it is things like being able to walk down the streets of Sebastian or Indianapolis or Colorado Springs or wherever. It is being able to purchase goods at an incredibly affordable price because of transaction costs being lower. It is being able to communicate seamlessly and immediately with your son or daughter half a world away by computer or by phone. These things are the outflows of the liberal order. But General Milley even puts it in more grim terms. When he says, if you really want to know what the liberal order gives us, is it gives us a world without great power war. And then he tells us this was about 2 months ago, I think, he described what the world was like with great power war. And the numbers are ghastly. We can't even begin to imagine them. People who were born in the 1950s or 60s, 70s, or 80s, young adults born in the 90s can't grasp the kinds of human loss that these great power wars did to nations in the 19-teens and the 1930s and 40s. Tens of millions of people dead. He talked about, Milley used this really stunning number. He said 26,000 American personnel were killed in 1918 during the Battle of Meuse-Argonne. In 56 days, 57,000 American personnel were killed in an 8-week span in the summer of 44. And then he says that's the butcher's bill of great power war. That's what the liberal international order that's been in existence for 7.5 decades is designed to prevent. And we just don't appreciate that or understand that. We just take it for granted. And it's not, it doesn't happen by accident or by magic. It takes America projecting power along with its allies into the world.
No, I couldn't agree more.
Especially if it didn't personally affect like my generation, so I understand what you're saying. We forget.
Well, think about it, Joy. I mean, I'm 50. I was born in 71. My dad was served in Vietnam. My grandfathers were both at D-Day. I didn't have to go off to war.
Right.
That's because my grandfathers and dad made the world better. There's still wars. Don't get me wrong. And we know, all of us know, and Joy, your husband was in the service. My dearest friends are Marines and F-15 pilots, literally. So I know the sacrifice in a way once removed, but it's different than great power war that literally devours cities and destroys nations. And we just take that for granted, that people who have lived in relative peace and prosperity for their whole lives.
It's funny because I'm actually just about the exact same age as you, Alan, and we're still very incredibly young, just in case anybody asks. But that being said, I couldn't echo the statement enough of not knowing what, for lack, not real world, but there was no wars growing up when I was a kid. There was just not. The thought of the United States ever being attacked, such as September 11th, simply wasn't, you never, ever thought that, of course, nobody realized that they would use civilian jetliners as weapons, but you also never thought that, you were going to see B-52s suddenly appear over Boston and carpet bomb us. My mother likes to tell me that there were two instances in her life. She's 87 now, or 6, that she'll never forget. One was when Pearl Harbor happened, because they got sent home from school, and as her, and I think she was 8 or 9 or whatever she was, when she was walking back, she, her and her girlfriends thought at any minute, the Japanese might or the Germans might attack us and drop bombs on them, so they were scared to death. And the other time was when JFK was killed, because we're Irish Catholics from Boston. But to me, I certainly will never forget September 11th and any of the events on that day. And I just remember thinking, in my head that day, I remember first, I had a buddy in New York, and that was so long ago, I don't think we had, if we did have cell phones, they were like $100 a minute during the day, so we were just doing emails. But he messaged me, and we thought that they were filming a movie. And it must have been a CGI, type of thing. And the smoke coming from the top of the building is part of the movie set, because there's no way that the United States could ever be attacked. And I think that was an incredible wake-up call to the fact that, nobody is immune from war in general. But like you said, avoid. And again, September 11th is one of the most horrible acts in the history of the world. But it's also not like you said, that there wasn't a large-scale war where, the numbers of people dying during World War II or even in Vietnam are obscene compared to, and again, one American death is too many for me, but they're obscene if you compare them to the war on terror from 2001 to 2020 compared to those past wars. And it's almost as if those wars were fought so that it would become less of a, more of a liberal order like you're talking about.
That's right. Sense. I think that's what their sacrifice was about, and that makes perfect sense, I think, and that's what that sacrifice is about, and that's what General Milley, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is trying to get across, that there's real blood and treasure, but mostly blood that comes if you let, that will be shed in enormous amounts if you let this liberal order go away. And or there'll be the loss of individual liberty if you let it be shaped by a country that share our values. So. Right. But that's something, you used the word marketing a minute ago, Mark. It's something that our political leaders of both parties have not been very effective at explaining. What are the benefits of the way the world is since 1945, of this liberal order to the average American. It's not just something they talk about in think tanks in Washington, D.C. or New York City or Munich Security Conference. These are things that really have a direct impact on Americans.
And our motto here is peace through strength, so we believe in keeping a strong military and hope that they will too, to prevent future wars or loss of life as well as our allies.
It's of my opinion that the last, in our allies, but the United States military and its military allies are really what is the one shining whatever that keeps the world from going into complete madness. Because I think if you're a madman, right before you press that button, you think, am I going to have to deal with the USA military and its allies, which I don't think anyone in their right mind would like to, unless they happen to have superheroes on their side, but I don't think that's happening yet. So I agree with all that. But
right. Yeah, and that's the kind of the extreme argument against having a strong military, like you referenced. Those of us who believe in a Reaganite defense posture, and of course, the American Security Council Foundation leads that effort. Recognize the benefits and the wisdom of peace through strength, but some people argue that this is just throwing money into the military, waste money, and or throwing money at these things overseas is always a waste. And certainly there is some waste, let's be honest. But it's really, and the numbers show the benefits of investing a little, and I would submit 3% is too little, but 4 or 5% of GDP to keep the peace, to keep some semblance of order, is proven over time to be better than risking temptations to a trial of strength, as Churchill talked about, or tempting, to use Mark's term, a madman from taking a risk he shouldn't take, and then fighting a war where we end up devoting, during World War II, there were some years we devoted 40% of GDP to the military, and of course we lost 450,000 men in that war. In World War I, we lost 100,000 men in just I think it was 17 months of fighting. So we were in the war very late, as you guys know. So it's we can be penny wise and pound foolish.
You and I have discussed, Alan, before about that economically putting money toward building up our military. I mean, I'm sure we're not going to go back to World War II strength, but at least, like you said, getting the numbers to a strength where we deter the enemy. If
you could deter them, that's right. And if we are in a Cold War II, which is what a lot of people think, Henry Kissinger thinks so, Neil Ferguson, the great historian who's British, and who wrote the great book Colossus about America, both of them use the phrase Cold War II or New Cold War. If we are, then we probably ought to increase defense spending up to Cold War levels, which you and I have talked about that many times, Joy. We're not anywhere close to that, by the way, at 3%. So.
Well, Mark, Alan, any closing thoughts on the liberal international order?
No, it's fascinating to discuss it with you. Always a pleasure, Joy, and good to have Mark part of the call, and always enjoy doing it.
Alan, it was fantastic to meet you, I wanted to just say finally. And just to let you know, I know a guy like yourself is incredibly busy, but next week, our 4-part series starts Tuesday. It's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. On Tuesday, we have a NYPD detective sergeant who was in one of the towers when the first plane hit. On Wednesday, we have my cousin, who is an author and an attorney who was working in downtown New York City as a lawyer when September 11th happened, and he left his job as an attorney and joined the Army. The story gets a little, the juice of the story is my cousin is very much an academic, not the type of guy you would have thought would have joined the Army to go to war, but that's what September 11th, spurred inside of him.
Yeah.
On the day after that, we have a young man who, well, he's now our age, but who was a young man at the time, who was his first job out of college as an investment banker for Morgan Stanley. He was on the 73rd floor of I believe the North Tower. I get them confused, but whatever one was hit second. He began evacuating, was on the 33rd floor of his tower when it was hit, and was able to make it out. And then on Friday, we have another author. He's from the New Yorker. He's a great guy named John Kenny, and he did a documentary called Looking for My Brother. His brother, Tom, who recently passed away of cancer, sadly, was on the Massachusetts Urban Search and Rescue Team, and he was up in the rubble for 8 days after September 11th, going through it all. So it's going to be an interesting 4 days of various viewpoints of the September 11th attack. So hopefully you can tune in and hear him. So we have our professional, Mr. Dowd, giving us his approval. But it was great to finally meet you, Alan, and I appreciate your wisdom.
Well, thank you for the kind words. That sounds like a wonderful series. To have those firsthand accounts and remembrances are essential, and I'm glad Joy and you are getting them on
yes,
a
Mark's
digital
keeping me very
platform.
busy.
Yes, I'm keeping Joy quite busy.
That's good, but to be able to save those is important because we need to hear those stories, and people who are in the generation behind mine need to hear those stories firsthand. I think that's really, you're doing a great public service. Those will be fascinating. I'll try to listen to them.
Absolutely, and we'll record them and get them to you.
Yes, it'll be a reminder of why we were in Afghanistan in the first place. But
that's right.
Thank you, Alan, for coming on. And we appreciate
Thank you
always
both.
talking
Have a
to
good
you.
Labor Day weekend.
Thank you.
You too, Alan, and I hate to say this, but I guess go Boilermakers, and I'll have to keep an eye on them.
That's right, and go BC.
All right, thank you, sir. Have a great day, Alan.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Alan.
Bye-bye.
Check out Alan's articles on our website under Position Papers, the Dowd Report at www.ascf.us. If you've liked what you heard today, please consider donating to our educational programs in this podcast. As I mentioned in the beginning, we are having a special right now. Any donation of $25 or more, and you will get a free copy of Mark Levin's American Marxism. And all of our podcasts can be viewed on the website as well as YouTube and Rumble. Thank
Facebook,
you.
Apple Podcast, the whole 9 yards.
Keep going. Please,
Yeah,
Mark,
we have
please.
all our podcasts can be heard on all formats. We're just getting them all out now, and we appreciate you tuning in. And Joy and I look forward to bringing you a ton of series on both national security and a little entertainment too.
Yes, we do. Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome. Have
And
a
thank
great
you.
week.